It's the contractual obligation episode of NES Works Gaiden Epoch. This time around, we have the remainder of the Super Cassette Vision's launch lineup, and there are no surprises to be found here. After supporting a console filled with strange variants on arcade hits and ancient TTL titles, Epic decided to go with crowd pleasers, cranking out new takes on old genres, things that had become standard fare in Japanese console gaming, beginning here with Super Golf. As you would damn well better know by now after all the many times I've talked about it, 1984 was a transformative year for the video game golf genre. Nintendo and HAL created the definitive interpretation of the format for Famicom, and Sukuda Original, or whatever anonymous development house they firmed work out to, offered a similar take a few months later with Ayako Okamoto's Match Play Golf for Multivision. Epoch's Super Golf arrived somewhere in between those two releases, but it's not quite the midpoint between them in terms of content. I'd instead characterize it as the midpoint between Nintendo's Golf and the genre as it existed before, as seen in the likes of Sega's Champion Golf or SG-1000. Well, I'd say it's like 25% Champion Golf, 75% Nintendo Golf. But that 25% really brings the game down. Super Golf allows you to tackle an 18-hole course, playing either the front half, the back half, or the whole thing. Each hole has its own par rating, as well as the usual course features surrounding the fairway. Water hazards, sand traps, rough, trees, and of course the cup on the green that you're trying to hit. In the broad strokes, as it were, the game works pretty similarly to other 8 and 16-bit golf titles. You play on a top-down view of the course and use the joystick to aim in the direction you want the ball to travel when you strike it. Once you make your club selection, you swing your club using a visual power meter, in this case an icon of your duffer, similar to the indicator in Match Play Golf. The ball flies, and the course viewpoint remains unchanged until you reach the green, at which point you move into an up-close view for putting. You have a few minor play options throughout, including the ability to golf with or without wind as a factor. And of course, you have to make your club choices based on the current distance to the cup. Sure, you'll want a 9-wood as your starter for most holes, but that club would almost definitely overshoot the mark on the one where you're only 160 meters from the green. On paper, this all seems fine. Standard fare, uninspiring, but it puts Super Cassette Vision in the game with a solid contemporary golf effort. In practice, Super Golf needs a lot of refinement to reach the level of NES Golf or even Match Play Golf. It feels just a little too primitive to work the way you want it to. For starters, you only have a limited number of angles at which to hit the ball when you swing or putt, where other golf games tended to allow you to really fine-tune your angle of approach, either with a very fine compass of possible directions or some sort of targeting cursor. Super Golf feels more like an approximation of aim. This especially hurts during the putting view, in which you need a lot more than the available aim options to properly home in on the cup. The clunky direction system is where you'll almost invariably blow a strong approach and lose any chance of shooting par. Simply getting the ball into the hole can sometimes take half a dozen attempts or even more, because you can't properly aim at the cup unless you happen to land the ball in a specific direction from it. It doesn't help that the Super Cassette Vision's spongy controller buttons make precise timing a difficult proposition at best. I'm not a fan of swing meters that depict the actual golfer in the best of circumstances. Just give me a simple linear bar meter any day, thanks. But trying to trigger your button press at a precise moment of the icon's swing feels like a crapshoot when the controller is so mushy and unresponsive. Oh well, it's almost really good, but doesn't quite work out. A swing and a miss, as they say. No, I don't care that that's the wrong sport. With both shooters and sports in the bag, all that was really left for Super Cassette Vision's Day 1 lineup was a conversion of a popular tabletop board game. This time around, it looks like Go and Shogi lost the coin toss, leaving us with the inevitable winner, Super Mahjong. Well, to be honest, Super Mahjong doesn't do much to distinguish itself from the other 8-bit Mahjong titles that hit the market a year earlier. And in point of fact, it actually feels like a step behind its contemporary competition. Sega, Nintendo, and Sukuda Original all managed to put out Mahjong titles in 1984 that offered something besides the single-player competition against a single computer opponent that you find here. Nintendo allowed one player to go up against 3 virtual players, Sukuda gave players 2 computer opponents, and Sega bodged together a way to pit 2 humans head-to-head on the same TV. Super Mahjong does not do any of these things, putting it in the same category as Nintendo's original Mahjong, Sega's Mahjong, and Casio's Excite Mahjong for PV-1000, all 1983 releases. But wait, there is one little detail that sets Super Mahjong apart from its peers: the hardware itself. Like Sega's home Mahjong, Super Mahjong comes with a bonus accessory made of plastic. Rather than an adhesive screen that sticks to the television, this one sticks to the console, a keyboard overlay for the Super Cassette Vision's numeric keypad. Much to my surprise, the Super Cassette Vision keypad is supposed to consist of dark gray buttons against a cream-white field. Both hardware units I own arrived with the keypad buttons surrounded by what appeared to be a black field imprinted with some text, which I assumed was simply how the hardware shipped. But no, it turns out the people who had previously owned these consoles had both played Super Mahjong and never bothered to decommission the hardware afterwards. The Super Mahjong uses the Super Cassette Vision keypad for inputting calls related to your hand or your play. Kind of like you have to say Uno before you play your next to last card in the game Uno, you have to call certain actions in order to score or win in Riichi Mahjong. Rather than simply making these calls by selecting text from a menu, Super Mahjong allows you to simply press the corresponding button on your keypad for each call. These commands are laid out on screen as part of the attract mode: 0 for Riichi, 1 for Pon, 2 for Chi, etc., etc. But the game also shipped with a little plastic overlay that you can set into the keypad frame for quick reference. I don't think this makes any real difference to the gameplay, and the keypad mostly serves as an inconvenience. It pretty much guarantees that you can't emulate this game correctly on any sort of console or FPGA device unless you attach a keyboard. And it also introduces a small, fragile, easily lost component to complicate the prospect of acquiring a copy of Super Mahjong complete in box for a collection. I mean, just consider the fact that there was a keyboard membrane attached to both of the consoles I own, which means there are 2 copies of Super Mahjong out there that don't have overlays anymore. I don't think anyone's really clamoring to own this particular game, so it's probably not a big deal, but still, it's the concept of the thing. It's a little annoying. But I guess this middling Mahjong sim needs something to set it apart from the minigames that had already done the same thing, or had done it better, and so we round out the Super Cassette Vision launch lineup with a game whose only claim to fame is that it shipped with an ephemeral accessory that became a part of the console itself, or something. Epoch's first post-launch Super Cassette Vision titles began rolling into stores in September of 1984. Would you be surprised to learn that the first of these games was a baseball simulator, Super Baseball? No? Well, would you be surprised to learn that Super Baseball is the first Japanese console game to directly imitate the style and look of Nintendo's Baseball for Famicom? And would you be surprised to learn that it also came in a licensed variant? Until Nintendo's Baseball arrived, Japanese baseball sims trailed far behind the more visually and mechanically elaborate sports adaptations Americans had been enjoying on Atari systems and their competitors. Nintendo introduced relatively complex play, multiple field perspectives, and charismatic player graphics to the format. In the process, they more or less defined Japan's default approach to the sport for the 8-bit generation. We've seen several direct descendants of Nintendo's baseball in Atlas and LJN's Major League Baseball, and of course in the form of Namco and Tengen's RBI Baseball, aka Family Stadium or Famista, aka perhaps the most popular baseball franchise of the 80s in Japan. But it turns out that Epoch beat all of those to the punch, gamely adopting just about every element of Nintendo's game, though perhaps not quite as deftly. Of course, baseball as a concept has great importance in Epoch's video game legacy. Their dedicated Terebi Yakyu Gameu console from the late 70s helped make the company a powerhouse of the industry in the early days. Epoch produced several LSI handheld interpretations of baseball as well. And the original Cassette Vision saw not one but 2 adaptations of the standalone title. In short, baseball was kind of their thing. So when Nintendo offered a genre-defining cartridge, Epoch did what it knew best. It straight up ripped off the competition's work in what was probably their most egregious lift since Yosaku. Everything from the dual-view fielding to the chubby little cartoon fielders appears to have been traced over Nintendo's homework and submitted without shame. And it's fine. Tons of other developers would do that too. You have to give Epoch some props for being the first, and for not being too proud of their own legacy creations to let that dated style go in favor of something more up to the moment. Super Baseball plays pretty well, if not quite as well as Nintendo's game. It lacks some of the other game's more granular features, like the ability to adjust your batting stance in the box when you stand at the plate. Still, it manages the basics. You can alter the nature of a pitch by tilting the control stick in different directions. and you can adjust a batter's swing similarly in order to bunt or reach to connect with an outside pitch. And it does stand apart in a few ways, especially in its heavy emphasis on base runners. When you play the CPU as your opponent, it'll take a very aggressive approach to stealing bases while on offense and obsessively attempt to tag out your own runners during the computer's pitching phases. Super Baseball also sticks with largely automated fielding, which is fine by me. This levels the playing field against the CPU, who, in Nintendo's game and many other derivatives, has an uncanny ability to place a glove beneath a fly ball that proves far more difficult for human players to equal. Of course, the CPU still gives itself tons of advantages here. It has a real knack for hitting home runs, especially with loaded bases, whereas players seem more adept at receiving outs on pop flies. I played a few single-player games in preparation for this episode, and the CPU regularly stomped me like a college team playing against little leaguers. Still, it's pretty decent as such things go, and stood as the second best baseball sim on the Japanese market at the time of its debut. That's pretty good. And Epoch went the extra mile here by attaching a pro player to the game as well, which, after Match Play Golf, looks to have been the second Japanese console sports game ever to have been endorsed by a celebrity. In this case, Super Baseball shipped in a variant bearing the name Tatsunori Hara, not to be mistaken for Tetsuo Hara, a star player for the Yomiuri Giants. That's neat, if a bit superfluous. It turns out the Hara version of Super Baseball is literally just a box variant. Inside the box, the game itself and even the cartridge are 100% identical to the standard release, making this just a superficial prestige attempt. But overall, Super Baseball reflects well on the Super Cassette Vision, certainly more so than Super Golf. Vastly more advanced than the Cassette Vision's baseball titles, it's a solid interpretation of the way Nintendo reinvented the genre only 9 months earlier, and makes a strong case for Super Cassette Vision as a contender here in 1984. And it shows that Epoch can still rip off other companies' ideas with the best of them, a skill that they'd put to use again soon. Next time, Epoch gets back into familiar territory by returning to the business of openly cloning other people's creations.